Well, I got through the board meeting, and now I'm going to force myself to get through the Trimet board training session. I want to know what they're doing. And it's hard to listen to this shit, but I want to know because I'm crazy. It's got 17 views, by the way.
You can see, you folks have the agenda up so you can see that right now.
Let's see.
You can all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So what I wanted to say is, first off, good afternoon to everybody.
David Bragdon's here. Look,
1 week.
Where's Eric and Jason?
So thank you all for being able
There's
to
David Bragdon, you guys.
today.
Eric can't stand this guy. Jason
anybody
loves him.
listening or wasn't involved in...
I think he's okay. I think he's got some good ideas. JC Vanetta's there, everybody's favorite. I don't know who this guy Carol is.
Putting this together. This session is a follow-up from our executive session that we had on July 22nd, where we discussed board roles, relationships, and communications related to how we, as Trimet board members, can create or could unintentionally create uncomfortable or unanticipated reactions if our roles or responsibilities aren't clear as board members. And oftentimes also members of the community are confused and misunderstood.
They are the most unaccountable body in Portland politics. They don't even tell anybody these meetings are happening. I've said that 1,000 times. Trimet doesn't even put this on their Facebook. They don't put it on their Twitter. That tells you right there where Trimet's at. It's just that one act of not publicizing these meetings. It tells you everything you really need to know. And I don't care if I see it because I don't have any following. I don't care what I say because I don't mean anything. I can't touch them.
Understood if that happens. So at the end of that session, it was agreed. I just went back and looked at kind of what things we talked about. We all said as new board members come on to this board, we have a responsibility to ensure that we do as much as possible with important education and to provide as much information as needed to ensure that all board members have clarity on how best to move forward as the board makes its decisions and tackles the issues that we have to confront with on a regular basis. We also
tackle the rubber stamping of the Trimet general manager. Trimet board is like many other boards. It just rubber stamps the executive's positions.
About the need for stronger training and ways to communicate about what could be perceived as lobbying contrary to board-approved policy. We also discussed that the board believed it important to have today's conversation given the issues that the board continues to face, especially around our desires for safety, security, and equity.
Safety, security. Yeah, there was a stabbing the other day at the Hollywood Transit Center.
We also realize that there are many different viewpoints from people in our districts and those who reach out to board members individually and collectively. And we noted the need for training and conversation around our purview and our role as board members to better serve the public. And I think the most important thing that I got out of that executive session.
Oh, they had an executive
session. We all felt the need to just have discussions around.
Okay, they had an executive session. That means they had a secret session. Executive session means they don't tell the public what's going on. And you know how I feel about that. Anytime they're meeting, government has no right to an executive session when they're taking your taxes and now they're being secret about what they're doing. And I'll say it again, anybody that votes yes to give the government your money is a fool. I don't care what they're asking for. You're a fool.
Governance on how to work to maintain and build trust, which I think is really the primary objective of today's session, just again, how we work together and how we make sure that we do it as effectively as possible. So as a result of that discussion, with the help of our general counsel, Shelley Devine, we have a group of folks who are taking time to help us in this area and to learn from their experience as board members, staff.
This guy has been on the board more than 8 years. Okay, he's been on the board way past his term. He's a whole year past his term, as is Stovall. And they're going to train him. And plus, he was a city manager. He was part of that whole elite class before he got on the board. This woman's a lawyer, friend of the governor. I mean, this guy was a big honcho in government in the Portland area, and then he went to New York government, and now he's got his own nonprofit. You know, these are all people that are part of this game.
Consultants with other transit districts throughout the United States. She went right to David Bragdon, the executive director of Transit Center, who then worked with us to enlist the help of 3 other great resources, who I think are all on board right now, to help us in our quest. And I want you to know that I've had a lot of time working with Dave Bragdon while at Metro. And as you read from his biography, he has a long and interesting...
And by the way, Bruce Warner, while he doesn't get the kind of pension McFarland and Hanson gets, he's got an $11,000 a month pension from Beaverton, I believe, plus all the rest of it. But how many people do you know that get a 5-figure pension? I don't know anybody.
Background. And I also know that Kimberly has posted copies of today's presentations.
I'd be in the ditch right now. I inherited the house from Mom, which is fully paid. So I got the house, which is, you got to have that, and enough money to keep it going for a while at least, if I'm not stupid about it.
For your information, although I think they'll be presented by put up on the screen by the presenters. So I understand that 3 of us have also taken advantage of the training provided by Transit Center. So I would just say that David is very qualified to give us great advice and counsel, and that he knows this region and Trimet very
wonderful,
well.
And
most importantly, he's agreed to help us. So unless any of the board members have anything to add to what I just said, or I didn't capture our desires from our executive session, I'll just stop for a minute.
So we didn't get, they had an executive session
board members wanted
where they didn't let us know what they're doing.
Kicking us off. I'm seeing no hands up for nobody talking. So with that, I'm going to turn it right over to...
I want to make sure everybody realizes what I feel about government. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's a criminal operation, all of government, because it steals money from the public and it gives money to the government insiders. It's a method of theft. It doesn't do any good for actual people. We don't really get anything from the government if you think about it. And they're talking about even taking away what little they do give you, like Social Security.
To Mr. Bragdon, if that's all right with you, David.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks very much. I think
Jeff will be interesting. I haven't heard him talk in years.
Let me share my screen. I'm really pleased to sort of be in Portland today, and on behalf of 2 of the 3 other presenters actually are my board members, and are 2 of them are my bosses. So let me first tell you a little bit about ourselves at Transit Center.
Where's the picture?
And kind of what it is that we do. So how is that? Does everybody see a familiar scene there? It's familiar to me, even from 3,000 miles away. Are you seeing it?
We're seeing it.
Familiar scene of downtown Portland. So this is actually, I'm not just using this for you. I use this in presentations all over the country. Just to introduce us, Transit Center, we're a civic foundation, so we're a nonprofit public interest organization. We're not a consulting firm. We have nothing to sell you or persuade you. Well, we do have things to persuade you of. Our goal is really to improve public transit in this country.
Anyway.
And not for its own sake. Many of us are transit fans and like transit for its own sake. But organizationally, we see transit as instrumental to better cities. In particular, transit is very important given the times that Bruce referenced, not just the times that we're in right now, but generally the challenges facing our country. Transit is incredibly important to the major issues that are facing us. One, growing inequality across our country, the need for racial justice.
Here they keep talking about that, don't they?
The challenges of climate change. And transit is really key to both of those things. There's a clear correlation between physical access, mobility and access, and socioeconomic mobility. And so much of our transportation infrastructure over the years, predominantly the highway system, really has been a tool of racism in terms of where highways have been located, in terms of communities that have been harmed by transportation. And the inability to get around is a huge, huge check on people's ambitions and ability to participate in the economy or get to other places. That's been even more true, obviously, during the pandemic. About a third of transit riders generally are in the job census categories called essential. That's a third on a normal day. Now they're about 100% of transit ridership. And so the importance of serving that and reducing auto dependence in terms of what auto dependence costs a household. If you're a lower income household and you're spending $8 to $12 a year on a car, and it's a huge burden. So in so many ways, transportation does need to address and can be a very effective way of addressing racial justice issues. The second, of course, climate change. I was out in Oregon 3 weeks ago. You're on the front lines. The forest fires obviously have a climate relationship. The biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in this country, of course, is transportation, primarily automobiles. And you cannot address climate change without significantly reducing auto dependence. And that means increasing transit ridership. And I'll keep coming back to this ridership point. It's all about the need to increase ridership if you're really going to make a difference between on both equity and in terms of the environment. So while we use this picture as kind of an ideal, the actual reality in most of the United States is pretty far from that ideal. We use this picture because this is really who we're working for and working with, and types of people whose voices we're trying to amplify, the riders. This is Atlanta, but it really could be just about anywhere. It could be someplace in the Portland region. No sidewalk, no shelter. The bus probably doesn't run very frequently. Streets entirely devised for cars, designed for cars. But we don't see this primarily as a design issue. Designs exist. Engineers can build sidewalks. Engineers can build streets that make sense for people. It's not a lack of technology, and it's often not a lack of money. It's a lack of power. And this really is about political power and empowering transit riders. And that is why we think boards are so important. We really hit on this idea over dinner with Christoph Spieler, who you're going to hear from in a minute. And we were in Houston talking about what he had done as a board member of the Houston Metro system to really improve that system. And so we have found in our studies of the field that often transit agency boards have a ton of untapped potential. They have all kinds of community connections, roots in the community, and insights that often are not taken advantage of, and the role isn't often understood. They're often obscure, don't have consistent norms and processes, and there's some unaccountability in some jurisdictions. It's a real mismatch across the country, but that's why we started this program, to really work on developing leadership potential for transit agency board members. Really happy that Keith and Ozzy and Linda participated in our programs in the past. A little bit more about sort of where we start, where we're coming from. We really put riders first. It really starts with understanding what it is that riders want and need. We carry out our work through applied research, which includes these rider surveys, technical assistance like we're doing today, or events around that. We have a very active blog and opinions and a range of publications. We do grant-making support to community-based organizations, and Fred is going to talk about one of our grantees, Ride New Orleans, community-based pro-transit organization. There's a similar organization in Houston called Houston Link, and Christoph is involved with that. You can find our work at transitcenter.org. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. With regard to this particular foundational work on Who's on Board, which is a survey we do every 2 or 3 years of riders, it just keeps coming back to the fundamentals. It's the basics of frequency, reliability, overall trip length, the idea of service that runs into the evenings and late night and weekends, and having the ability to take a number of different types of trips, not just the 9 to 5 conventional way we think about transit, but that those are the fundamentals that we always stress agencies should be focusing on: frequency and reliability. We find sometimes a lot of the things that get attention actually don't show up on rider concern surveys. There's often a lot of attention around an issue about free fares. Well, actually, the biggest obstacle to people using transit is not the price, and they say that themselves. It's the lack of service. and the lack of service.
That's probably true. I don't dispute that, but that's not the point with the fare free transit concept. The point of the fare free transit concept is to get the police state out of the transit business. You know, we do know for a fact that it's the economically depressed that gets cited for the fare evasion. If you want real equity in transit services, you have to stop harassing people for the fare. Now, he's part of this industrial complex, and so he's going to make excuses to not do it. But this thinking is wrong. No, he's right when he says the fares are not the reason people don't use the transit. People don't use the transit because it sucks. It just sucks. Just say the truth. It's terrible. You can hear it on the scanner. You can hear it. Supposedly one of the best places in the country is Trimet. And that would be true on a lot of respects. Like the equipment's good, comparatively. If I look at MBTA and I look at Trimet, I would be lying to you if I said I didn't prefer Trimet on all kinds of levels. I mean, MBTA is much more comprehensive than Trimet, but Trimet's a better system to ride on as a rider. People don't use it because it sucks. And the ones that do use it were taking it because they had to, like getting to downtown Portland. If you went back when they used to commute, that's how you could get there. And this is all changed now. COVID world order has changed all of this.
This is, in fact, the biggest obstacle. We've also, the speed and reliability issue, street design, big issue there. Bus lanes, we really applaud Portland and Trimet and the Rose Lanes project, and saving a few minutes here and there. Tremendous ridership gains that we've seen anywhere that's been tried. So that's just a little bit of sort of our fundamentals. That's the extent I'm really going to talk about transit today, because today's not really about transit, it's about the board. So just to tell you a little bit about who we are. Now, for those who I don't know yet, a little bit about me, because I moved from Portland to New York 10 years ago this month. It's been a fast decade since I lived in Portland. But in the prior 40 years, I lived almost entirely in Portland. I'm an old friend of Trimet. My first engagement with Trimet was in seventh grade, when I discovered the freedom that I had as a seventh grader in Southeast Portland, that I could get downtown on my own without asking anybody to drive me. I could go to VMAX Sandwich Shop or the Music Millennium. I could go to the Hostess Coffee Shop, if you remember that place. It's where Nordstrom is now. That I could do all that and have that type of freedom, and the freedom that transit brings to me. And I've been hooked on it ever since. And I was followed then Trimet. I testified. This is probably the first time I've spoken officially to a Trimet board in about 40 years, but I used to do it quite a bit. In fact, I wrote Governor McCall a letter when I was 15 and asked him to appoint me to the Trimet board. This is actually the truth. He wrote me back a nice letter that I still have someplace, declining to appoint me, but saying, don't let this discourage you. Don't let this discourage you. Keep your interest in going. And so I did. I kept staying interested in transit. I was actually an intern, a paid intern at Trimet in the summer of 1974, wrote a manual. They printed up 20,000 copies. It was the first guide to transit in Portland that they distributed. And then 20 years later, taking heed from Governor McCall, I ran for office, and transit was a big part of my platform. Other people used their pictures with school children or parks or something in their brochure. I had Max Light Rail in the back of my photo in the brochure. Ran for office, served nearly 12 years on the Metro Council. That's where Bruce and I first met. First met Bruce in December of 1998 on a bus trip to Arlington, Oregon, to the landfill. We were watching the trains in the gorge. Bruce may remember that. And as you know, Metro Council works very closely with Trimet. All the modeling, all the environmental impact statements, all the federal funding, all of that coming through Metro Council. So a long association between those two organizations. The real point, though, in terms of the Metro experience, I really want to stress today is that the Metro Council is like the Trimet board in the sense that it structurally is very similar, in that the Metro Council is a policy setting board It is a legislative body that delegates day-to-day management to a chief operating officer. And we're going to keep coming back to that point, the idea of a board setting policy and management managing. That is exactly how the Metro Council is structured, and that's how Trimet is structured. That's how many governmental organizations are structured. So really our emphasis today, again, not on transit. We're happy to do another event about transit. We'll talk about buses another time. Our agenda today is really not technical details, about board norms and how it works in other places. And I'm really excited to be able to bring two of my board members and a third person that we work with who are your peers in other parts of the country to talk about how they do it. We'll kind of talk about role of the chair, the dynamics among board members. We're going to have an encouraged conversation among you on that, the relationship between the board and management, and then what it's like when you're outside the organization and speaking outside. So when you're first appointed, I'm sure they throw all kinds of numbers at you. I mean, and there's a lot to learn. And my first thought is, you really don't need to memorize all these things as a board member. I'm going to tell you the one number you need to memorize. There's some interesting ones here, but let me give you a different way of thinking about them. 1.53 billion. You might recognize that. That was your most recent adopted budget that I saw.
They're up to 1.5 billion.
And you don't need to memorize every bit of that. You have a finance committee, and you have a CFO. You need to make sure that that's an expression of priorities. That's really what that is. Now, 21, I mean, that's a good number too. You can drink in Oregon at 21. But it's just here because that's actually, it's line number 21 that runs between Gresham and Park Rose. Now, and you don't need to know, you don't need to memorize that as a board member. Christoph, who you're going to hear from in a minute, he's a transit savant, and he would know that. He probably knows where the 21 runs, even though he doesn't even live in Portland. But really, what you need to know is it's serving Gresham and Park Rose. And what you need to know is, well, Gresham and Park Rose, those are two really good places where there's travel demand, and are we adequately serving it? But whether it runs on 223rd or runs on Halsey or runs on Sandy, I mean, let the professionals figure out the actual technical details of how that works. 310,000, that of course, that's on a normal pre-pandemic day, that's how many people you're serving. That's a good number to keep in mind. I think that's a good thing to think about, as that's who we're serving. That's the constituency that, you come from a particular district, or that you come with an appointment from the governor, but you're not serving the governor anymore. You're not serving just a district. You're serving those 310,000 people.
Yeah, right.
And I would also think about it in terms of segmenting that. Like, who are they? What do they need? What are they telling you in surveys? What are their travel demands? And it's not so much the number, it's the quality.
I hope you're enjoying this.
5307, another number you don't need to know. It's the Urbanized Area Formula Funds. It's part of federal law. You have government relations staff to do that, to know that. What you need to know about federal policy is that you're going to be helpful in talking to Senator Merkley, talking to Senator Wyden, that you as directors have other community connections. So when Ron Wyden looks at Travis, he doesn't just see Trimet. He said, well, this guy's also connected to the Gresham Chamber of Commerce. When he sees Keith, he said, well, this is Keith. I've known Keith a long time. If he's saying something on behalf of Trimet, I'm going to listen. And I know Keith from his days in the labor movement. So again, you don't need to know the intricacies. Trust your staff on the intricacies of federal policy. You play at the high level. You play at the official level to the officials.
Yeah.
16%, that's the percentage of your budget that comes, or your revenue, rather, your budget, the percentage of revenue that comes from fares. It's a good number to know when people start talking about, well, let's not have fares. Well, then a reasonable question is, well, where are we going to get 16% of the money? Without 16% of the revenue, you're going to cut costs, and boards make trade-offs. You can't just deal it.
Well, without 16% of the revenue, you cut 16% of the service, I suppose. Or you take it out of capital projects, maybe? How about information technology? Maybe the marketing budget. I just happen to have in front of me here. Well, let's not get into it. I'm not going to debate with him right now.
Sound bites of things that sound good. You really think about those fiscal consequences. 688, that's the number of buses that you had in the last National Transit Database. Again, you don't need to memorize that because it's going to be out of date in 6 months. And moreover, that's just talking about yourself and your own attributes. Really, the issues you should be thinking about is how many people, what's the percentage of the people in your region that have access on a 5-minute walk to a frequent bus line that runs every 5 minutes. Then let your staff figure out how many buses does it take to do that. Actually, a metric that Seattle uses, King County Metro uses. And it's about them. It's about the people being served, not about us. Have you ever seen a UPS ad or a FedEx ad where they told you how many planes they have? No, they don't. You don't care how many planes they have. What do they tell you? They tell you, you give us a package by 4 o'clock here, we'll deliver across the country at 9 a.m. You don't really care about their equipment. You care about what they're doing for you.
Is this
GASB 68, again, it's like, that's an interesting number. That's an accounting term. Well, what you need to know, not being accountants, is do you have a good auditor and do you trust them? That's all you need to know. And then 23 compared to 15. Well, 23 minutes is how long it takes to get from Milwaukee to Oregon City on the bus. 15 minutes is how long it takes to do it in a car. Again, not numbers to memorize, but it might provoke the question, why does it take 53% longer to go by bus? And let's do something about speeds everywhere. So again, I think trying to get you thinking just beyond sort of the detail or micromanagement of particular figures, and really think about what those figures mean in terms of people. Now, there is one number that you do need to memorize, and this is the number that every Metro counselor, if they're successful, memorizes, and is always has in mind. And if you just memorize this, the number is 4. And the number is 4 because there are 7 of you, and 4 is a majority. So 4 is the number that you need to make policy. 4 is the minimum of number you need to give direction to staff. 4 is the number you need to adopt or to amend a budget. 4 is the minimum number that you need to actually make a difference in terms of being on the board. Now, individuals do matter. Individuals matter a whole lot. And Christoph and Amanda and Fred, as individuals, are leaders on their board. They matter a whole lot. They have a whole lot of influence as individuals, but their individuals' influence starts with their peers, by influencing their peers. And that is exactly how it was on the Metro Council as well. An individual can't really carry anything out. An individual can have great ideas, but unless there's 3 other members who agree, then it doesn't get carried out. So let's go on now to the sort of those internal dynamics. I said I would talk just briefly about the role of the chair, or in case your case or Metro Council's case, it's the president. I benefited a lot from a good mentor, Senator Mark Hatfield. We could also say without him, we would not have light rail to Gresham. Without him, therefore, we probably wouldn't have light rail to Hillsborough or anywhere else either. OHSU would be a couple of buildings up on the hill with maybe a fluorescent light bulb. The Columbia River Channel would be 35 feet instead of the 43 feet that it is. A lot of things to thank Senator Hatfield for. But what I thank him for, shortly after I became president of the Metro Council, he was retired. He came over to me at an event at Portland State University, very soft, and shook hands and said, congratulations.
Well, this is basically, you see what this is. I wonder how much they paid for this, sir. I wonder how much they paid Bragdon. You know that this is obviously something they paid him to do. And he's just basically, I mean, is this really anything useful? I don't really think so. Do you?
Was following this stuff even in retirement. Something I thought was relatively obscure, and that he would come over and talk to somebody in my position. I was really flattered. He very softly said, congratulations, but remember, sometimes you have to show them who the chair is. Wow, what is this? I mean, here's this dignified pacifist, the least bombastic person you've ever imagined in the U.S. Senate, and he's got this iron backbone of saying, it sounds like, throw your weight around or something. And that's not actually what he meant. What he meant was, you have a couple of tools that are official. You're running the meetings and you have Robert's rules, but those are resources, is really what he said. Those are things you have to show that you can run a meeting and that you can keep things going, but that it's also really about the relationships. And I took Senator Hatfield's advice, and I had sort of I was in the council presidency for nearly 8 years and had sort of a set of operating guidelines that I had in my head and that I actually shared with my colleagues at the time, and said, here's the deal. Okay, so I am a firm and fair steward of the process. That means we keep things going, set an agenda, keep it tight. That means like sometimes we're going to get to a point where we cut things off, but it's been fair. Everybody's had a say. My old colleague, Carl Hostica on the bikes, he would whisper to me once in a while. He'd say, I think we're at the stage where everything has been said, but not everybody has said it, but we don't need to hear it anymore. Nobody likes stoplights necessarily themselves, but we all abide by them because they are fair for the whole group. And so that was part of my understanding, was that the parliamentary chair has a lot of power, but it's the best power. It's the power you don't necessarily use. It's just there to keep the group moving and keep things going. And another expectation I had, and nobody ever violated this, was just no surprises. I said to everybody got elected, whenever they joined the council, I said, look, here's the deal. I'll never use procedure against you to cut you off. If you can't get a second, I'll even put the gavel aside and second it for discussion myself. I'll never use process against you, but in return, you don't surprise me. Come to me when you want something. I'll put it on the agenda, but don't surprise me in the meeting. And that always really worked. That led to a set of sort of understandings that we had as counselors. And again, 7-member body, a lot of similarities here. Some of these were things that were explicit, that we understood. Others were things that we just caught on to pretty quickly. The key one was that each is an individual. We all went there because we were elected. In our case, you're appointed, but we were all there because we had points of view. We had knowledge. We had life experience. We had things we wanted to do. Yeah. We had constituencies that had helped put us there. They voted for us.
That's nice, David. Moving along.
Our role.
I don't want to hear
chamber.
Enjoyed the time with the board.
Okay,
thank you all for the opportunity to speak.
All right, let's get somebody else up.
This pandemic is over. So I'll turn it over to Fred at this point. And as I said, Fred is one of my 8 bosses. He's on the board of Transit Center. And
let's hear what Fred says.
He is from New Orleans. And if I can stop sharing, there, I've got to push I'm going to stop sharing so that he can. And so please. Here to stop sharing. There we go. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Hey, David, thank you. And let me see if I can share the right piece of information. I'm sure as many people, we have our mini offices set up. I have 2 different monitors and occasionally a third. So is it showing? All right. Great. I think it's showing
Journey from
the
activist to
slideshow, right?
commissioner. So let's hear this.
Okay.
Give it to us, baby.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, David. It was really, well, first off, can everyone see this?
Us, baby.
I guess let me know, the host, if for some reason the screen doesn't pop up or something happens. But I want to say thank you all for the opportunity to speak. This has been, except during COVID time, I think, just it's wonderful to have any chance to talk about transit, to talk with people that are allies, to talk with friends, hear from friends and David and Christoph, and hopefully create some new friends. I also want to acknowledge, so I've been on the Transit Center board for, I guess, almost 2 years now, coming up on in 2 years. And we did our board trip last year. It was a West Coast trip where we started in Portland, then went to Seattle, then Vancouver. And while I've had numerous travels to California, I have family there. This was the first time I've been to Portland, Oregon. And I thoroughly enjoyed our time in Portland. I arrived a day early, had a chance to ride the transit system a little bit on my own, met one of my college friends I hadn't seen in 20 years, enjoyed the time with the board, and seeing Portland, learning a little bit about it. And I was looking forward to this summer to a trip back to Portland. Another good friend just relocated there recently, and due to COVID, wasn't able to take it. But I am looking forward to my next chance to come and experience your wonderful city. So, great. Well, I will jump in.
Enough of this already.
I think really, I have a title slide in. I'm in the picture all the way to the right. And I kind of made it a little bit dimmer so the text would stand out. But yes, as David mentioned, I am a board member of New Orleans Regional Transit Authority, which is our, as I similar to Trimet, we are a regional transit agency that's for Orleans Parish, covers parts of Jefferson and St. Bernard. So our region, which I'll share a little bit more about. I am our urban planner. I work for a small consulting firm, and I've been doing a lot of land use planning.
He's part of the consultant class. There you go, folks.
Zoning, code development in my day job. And I've also been a transit rider for a long time in New Orleans. In fact, one of the things that COVID and obviously working from home is that I realized I probably, in the time I've been living in New Orleans, this is the least amount of transit I've used. Even though I've owned a car for a large portion of that time, but still, this is the least amount of transit I've used, in part because I'm at home, not on the road.
Yeah, you're one of the lucky ones. You're not an essential worker. You're at home.
I'm going to advance the slide. I'm going to have to do it.
Come on.
That way. All right, for some reason.
Here we go. You guys, we got to
get. There we go. Okay. So this is really a summary of what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes. I have a short presentation, but my New Orleans transit story, really the opportunities and challenges of my transition from advocate to board member, and then share some thoughts on really supporting and engaging transit advocates in your community. David talked a little bit about transit centers work and supporting advocacy, which is critical. It's really instrumental. And this slide is one that, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but just talking about the reasons why advocacy is important in transit and in working with transit agencies, providing an essential push and support of public officials in their efforts to improve transit, which is me and you. I think advocacy, if done well, really provides us the support to make good decisions and to really engage the public. Can lead to change by looking at problems with a different lens than the agency staff. I think one of our jobs as we have a view and a role as agency board members, the staff is a task, and I think advocates also help us to look at problems and really think about it as our public and ridership does, because we can't be everywhere at all the time. And then really helps agency staff and board navigate let the landmine. And this is really a colloquial for, an issue that we may propose a new plan or some new service or change in the network. And, it may meet all the check boxes of good transit or good land use planning or whatever. But it's also often we make decisions in silos based on the information we have. And oftentimes riders and the public have access to different information and can help us really improve our decision.
All right, moving on.
Special projects, specific parts of service, some maintenance.
This is such crap.
Very, very short version of the journey. But it was based in kind of really, creating an organization, creating a voice, being a voice for riders, and then using that to really engage the political decision makers in gaining power. So I want to say that's really the background. Just if our jobs aren't easy. I think there are a lot of things that we have to think about: long-term agency goals, finances. What is our trend? One of our jobs is to really represent the organization and to guide things work. This in there. I think this should also be the stage of the conversation. We should have great values and wonderful ideas, but really advocacy can be the key to really affecting
allow advocates to speak boldly. You mean 2 minutes, 3 minutes? That's all you do. Trimet doesn't follow any of these.
Advocates as allies. Again,
yeah, right.
Let's get it out right now so we can talk about it. Otherwise, I think let's move forward. But let's hear from the board real quickly. There was a lot of good information you guys presented for us.
Yeah, right. A lot of useless shit.
Excellent. So I'm Christoph Spieler. I served on the board of directors of Houston Metro for 8 years. I'm currently director of planning at Hewitt-Zollars, which is a consulting firm in our...
Another fucking professional consultant. See, we can't get anything from these people because this is the consultancy class. Okay, they're part of the parasites on public transportation dollars. All of these people are paid from your tax dollars, and they're getting contracts, pork contracts to consult. And it's just horrible. This is the parasites here. You're listening to the parasites.
Houston office. And I'm very happy to be talking to Portland, which is a city that we have often looked to as a model for transit. The idea of a frequent bus network, which we have implemented in Houston, we got from Portland, among other places, and a city I've always enjoyed visiting. I think both Fred and David are actually in this photo that I took last time we were here. And I come to this from a very different place. Houston is a very car-oriented city, and a city that's not really historically known for its transit. But I live a very transit-oriented life in Houston. In this picture, you can see where I live, you can see the office I work in, and you can see the train that can take me back and forth between the two of them. I got into this world as a transit rider. I started taking the bus to get to work and realized that it made my life better. That I had free time, I was able to do writing on the bus, I was more relaxed, I was happier. And
he wasn't riding the 52, 57 or the 72 or the 9 or the ones that we've been listening to lately on the scanner.
The whole reason I am involved in transit and in planning is to give other people that opportunity as well. Like Fred and David both, I started as an advocate. I actually wrote a blog about Houston transportation called Intermodality, and as a result...
What about me? Rantings of a former Trimet bus driver, that qualifies me to be on some big consultant payroll right from home now. I can do it right from home because COVID world order. So who's going to hire me and give me six-figure income?
As a result of that, I became the first person appointed to the Houston Metro Board as a direct result of blogging. Metro has a 9-member board, 5 appointed by the city of Houston, 2 by the smaller cities, 2 by Harris County. As you can note here, Houston can outvote the others if it wants to. In reality, it is a much more delicate power balance because the smaller cities in Harris County have quite a bit of power in the legislature. So like every board, there's a lot of sort of back and forth between competing interests.
Bullshit.
While I was on the board, we got a lot of things accomplished. We built 3 new light rail lines. As I talked about later, we redid our entire local bus network. We put the agency on much more solid financial footing. We started live streaming board meetings and ended up starting the stages of preparing a long-range plan. So it was an amazing experience. But I learned a lot in the process about what it is to be a board member. And I think from the outside world, it often feels like board members are a sort of rubber stamp. Yeah. That, the board approves what the agency wants to do. And the most obvious public power of a board is the power to vote. That you sit at a table and you have a vote at that table. And that is sometimes a very important power, used both ways. Probably the most important vote I ever cast on the board was the one of an 8-to-1 vote, where I, having politely talked to the board chair about it beforehand, expressed my disagreement with something we were about to put on the ballot. That actually gave me leverage. But I would say that voting is generally the least important thing that a board member does. That as a board member, you have many more important powers. The first is the power to ask questions. And this is the power to ask questions when you are sitting at a board table, the power to shape that discussion, but also the power to ask questions outside of the boardroom. The thing I did the most as a board member is go to the CEO and ask for briefings from the staff on specific issues I was interested in so I could ask questions about those issues. Not direct, because I would never by myself direct the staff to do anything, but simply ask questions. And that is an incredibly powerful power. You can shine the light onto things that need attention paid to them. You can drive the discussion. And of course, you also have the power to pontificate. That time you spend at the table with a microphone in front of you, that microphone is an incredibly powerful tool if it is used well. I discovered that because I'd actually been a writer, I was good at saying brief, succinct things at a board table, and found myself quite frequently on the news the morning after as the thing the reporters had recorded directly out of the board meeting. Being able to sort of shape a discussion, being able to make statements that help shape how people think about things is an incredibly meaningful thing to do. And as a board, you could see how when we talked about issues, that would slowly shape the way the agency staff talked about the same issues, would slowly shape the way the public and reporters talked about the same issues. And we have the power to convene. Board members are in a great position to, then another big tension. We can think about the little changes one bit at a time, where every change makes sense on it.
I don't see the
fascinating initiatives.
I don't see the purpose of this.
My background, I'll just say, is in city planning, and I grew up in New York City, taking the M79 crosstown bus every day to school. So I thought that it would be great, just because we're all getting to know one another, if we could just do some introductions, and if you could just say your name.
No, I can't take anymore.
For those on the board, you could say your name and just one thing you love about serving.
Ridiculous.
On a board with so much diversity, and so we all bring different perspectives, and we're
okay,
able
I want to hear our
listen.
board talk. Let's see.
The newest board member, but
let's hear him. Okay,
because it was going to take an entire day to use transit to do all this.
All right, let's go back.
I always thought
on the board of a transit.
All right, let's hear it now. This might be something we'll listen to.
And I can start just to give you a moment to think. And so what I love about being on the SFMT board is that I honestly feel connected to San Francisco in a new way. Whenever I see a bus go by, I'll feel proud of that operator. Whenever I see a bunch of teenagers on the back of the bus littering trash on the floor, I told them to pick it up. That's my bus.
Yeah,
that's part of our system.
Smart woman.
You have to respect it.
Get smacked.
And I just feel really connected to the city in a different way. So maybe, Bruce, can I turn it over to you? And then after people share, just call on one of your colleagues on the board.
Yeah, let's hear this. This might be good.
Yeah, sure. Put you on the spot first. Okay. So I have to tell stories about I actually moved to Portland in 1974, in January of 1974, and probably people don't remember what was going on in this January of 1974, but I do. That was the odd even gas rationing and essentially the oil embargoes, and so I learned to rely on transit and the bus to get me to work. It's my first job out of graduate school was down here in Portland. So
really?
I agree with you. I think the biggest thing that I saw with transit was it was a good opportunity to see other parts of the city and not drive, and also meet people. And back then, people weren't really focusing on their iPads and iPhones as much, and I got to know a number of people riding the buses and learned a little bit about them and their interests. And back then also, I lived at the end of the line, so I got to know the bus drivers and got to know them personally. And they would wake me up occasionally in the evenings. So when I was coming home,
I'm having a hard time believing
fall
that.
asleep on the bus. But yeah, I agree. I always thought the transit was a vital part of the community, and it was underappreciated, I thought. And so I'm pleased to say in my professional career, I've been involved in transportation, most of it, and been a big supporter of transit for the reasons you just described. It's a tool. It's a very important tool for the economy and for growth. And I think we still haven't realized its full potential, and I'm hoping we can. So you want me to turn it over to our vice chair, Travis? Are you there?
Okay, the pontificator himself. Let's hear Mr. Pontificator.
Can you hear me?
Well, you bet.
So, I mean, I can't really add too much of what Bruce, what you just said, in regards to kind of the overall benefit of transit and what we have the ability and opportunity to offer, except for, what I see as, I just think there's so much contribution that transit makes and can make, and it's absolutely been
Like some kind of a cheerleader.
for me over the last 9 years that I've had the opportunity to be a part of the board, just the contribution that we've been able to make in ensuring that we've raised the visibility of transit, some of the opportunities that it has to deliver on many of the things that you just referenced, Bruce. And so, I can't say enough about how I appreciated transit and its impact, its positive impact prior, and now I even appreciate it more. And as many of you know, I lived in a transit-oriented development for 13 years and got the benefit of just hopping on the MAX and going all over the city, and further appreciating the opportunity that we have. David talked about in the beginning the concept of the impact of single occupancy cars and vehicles and its contribution to the issues with carbon. And I would have to say, being from Kansas, originally we don't look at transit as we look at it, somewhat on the West Coast and somewhat in the larger major metropolitan cities. And so coming to Portland, originally I didn't really have the appreciation for transit that I do now, and its accessibility. And I know I told the one story before, but years ago when I first joined the board, it was a Saturday morning. I got up and I had like about 6 errands that I had to run. And I said, okay, I'm going to do it all on transit. So I blocked out the entire day because it was going to take an entire day to use transit to do all this. By 1 p.m., I was home, and I'd gotten everything done. And what I didn't appreciate that I did afterwards was the proximity of how close we are, which the one that surprised me the most is when I'm on the top of Mount Tabor. And I'm thinking I'm gonna have to walk a long way before I get to transit. And it said that it was like 400 feet or yards away, and I couldn't believe it. I didn't believe we had that type of coverage. So it's been for me almost 9 years on the Trimet board. I've really appreciated more so the responsibilities that we have in ensuring that we are have an incredibly positive impact on transit, on climate change. Everything that's been presented so far in this conversation has been something that I embrace and will continue to embrace eventually as I roll off the board and potentially go to other opportunities in leadership. As we all know, running for mayor of Gresham also gives me this incredible appreciation of how we can leverage transit to better deliver for our citizens in East County.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Well, that's a usual
and
shit.
Just as we move through the other
this is really a waste of time to
if
watch.
you could just do your name and sort of one thing you love about serving on the transit board, just for sake of time, that would be great. I don't know if I'll pass it to somebody else. Bruce?
How about Linda?
Linda, great.
Okay. I'm not the newest board member, but compared to Travis and Bruce, I'm one of the newer board members. And I came to the transit board at the request of a local mayor to serve a part of the Portland metro area that at that point was vacant within the Trimet board. And being somebody who's worked in higher education, where access was a big part of my career background, I felt that there was a real relevancy to access in terms of what transit would provide. I bring to the board, and what I've enjoyed serving on the board is I tend to look at things from a very factual, empirical way, and also look at the business practices that we have actually strengthened over the last 2 to 3 years within the organization. So I've lived and been in places where I've relied totally on transit, but I currently live in a part of the region where it's almost not available to me. So I'm an advocate for providing more transit to the southern part of the greater Portland metro area. And so that's what I bring to the board, is a strong financial acumen, business
She
practices,
is fucking useless.
organizational transformation background.
Useless.
And I've enjoyed the interplay with the board and the general manager in terms of watching the evolution of what is going on within the agency. I'm obviously troubled by some of the issues in Portland right now, and the fact that, you know, no one ever, you can't make everyone happy all the time. And it's, so you get a lot of dissent because that's what you hear as a board member.
Thank you.
How about you, Keith?
Well,
Bullshit.
thank you. I'm one of the newest board members. I've only been here 28 months, even though I'm probably one of the oldest board members.
28 months. He's been there that long.
I appreciate the fact that I'm on a board with so much diversity, and so we all bring different perspectives, and we're able to listen with open-mindedness and come to decisions and be able to. There's a oneness in the group, I think, that comes from.
All right, I can't.
Being able to listen to someone and value their.
I can't take it anymore. I'm sorry. I can't take it anymore. All right, over and out. It's just terrible.